Hello, everyone, and welcome to Unity's official live stream. We're here for another Creator Spotlight, the show where you get a rare in-engine look at incredible made with Unity games. Today's game is Lego Builder's Journey from Lightbrick Studios. We'll be talking about the game's journey from prototype to finished game, and then across platforms from console to iOS, and most recently, the Apple Vision Pro. There's a lot of XR talk today, so with me is Senior Advocate at Unity and overall XR expert, Antonia Forster. Antonia, I'm so glad you're here to help us with all of your XR context.
Thanks so much, Hassan. So hi, everyone. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Antonia Forster. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a senior advocate here at Unity. I'm also a senior technical specialist in AR, VR, XR, spatial computing, whatever your preferred terminology is. So all about headsets and blending the real world with digital content to make it fully immersive and as exciting as possible. So really, really happy to be joining you here today. Thanks so much.
So good to have you, and I can see you're not lying because you have like 12 headsets in the background behind you.
Yeah, I've gathered them over the years, so yeah, I've got quite a few at this point.
Awesome. So I can't wait to jump into all of this with you. In addition to the overall journey, we're also going to talk about the importance of audio in the game, as well as how they kept the visual identity cohesive across all the diverse platforms, which you can imagine is probably like a huge challenge, but very interesting to dive into. And so before we bring on the devs themselves, let's look at some of the footage of Lego Builder's Journey being played in XR.
Amazing. Let's do it.
Hello, everyone. How's it going?
Hey.
So good to have you. It's so crazy to see that just on a table, like in the actual space. So much. I can't wait to dive into all of that. Karsten, Mikkel, Jonas, so good to have you. Let's do a quick round of introductions for everyone watching, starting with Karsten.
Hi there. I'm Karsten Lund. I'm the creative director of the studio and also on this title. And I have a sort of a long background in video games. I think I'm actually celebrating my 30th anniversary of being in the game industry this year.
Incredible.
Wow.
So yeah, I've had a past in Square Enix Montreal and IO Interactive and stuff like that.
That's amazing. I didn't know
That's
that.
An amazing legacy.
Congratulations on that. And Mikkel.
Yeah, I'm Mikkel. I'm technical lead at Lightbrick, and I do rendering and systems and ports to different platforms for Lego Builder's Journey, and all sorts of technical stuff. I'm not quite as old as Karsten, so I only have 25 years of experience in the game industry.
I don't know if that was a diss or if that was a compliment, but
both.
we'll take it.
I choose both.
But it's a pleasure to have you, Mikkel. And Jonas.
Hey, I'm Jonas, game designer at Lightbrick Studio. I do mostly like core game mechanics and innovation, stuff like that. And since it became about experience, I can celebrate 6 years of being in the industry, so being the young gun.
I mean, 6 years in the game industry is a lot. We all know.
Yeah,
for a
genuinely.
fact. For sure. It's so great to have all of you again. Before we jump into like specifics of Apple Vision Pro or how the game was ported and all of that, I would love to hear more just about the game itself, about Lego Builder's journey and the journey that the game went on. And I think, Karsten, you have a really nice like presentation for us to talk about the game's journey.
Yeah, sure. I have a little bit of a slide deck here to talk about the very beginning and sort of all the thoughts that went into it and what we wanted to do and how it ended up, which is, everybody worked in games will know that it's always quite different what you have in your head and what ends up on the screen. And in this case, it's very different because actually these are one of the few games that you can actually do a physical prototype of, because the main idea of this game was to make a game that felt exactly like playing with Lego bricks.
That's amazing.
And it should be intuitive and self-explanatory, and it should have that feeling that you know exactly what to do, you know how to play with it. And in the middle of that, we wanted a little bit of a poetic narrative story, like a sort of more like an indie game kind of vibe. That was the experiment we set out to do.
Nice.
So this is me building with bricks, presenting it to my daughter, trying to figure out if she could figure this out. And she totally could. Maybe it was also a little bit on the nose with the sort of checkered flag and stuff like that. But I guess we moved on to other sort of... I need to switch the slides. I can't seem to switch the slides for the next one.
I love that you can kind of prototype physically with this. I think that's quite a rare opportunity.
Yeah.
People talk about paper prototypes, but this is like the next level, just Lego prototypes.
Exactly.
I think spatial computing in particular, I think it's, you really have this opportunity to kind of leverage space. So it really is kind of like a 3D toy that you're interacting with these objects in space. And I think a lot of times we forget that as game designers, that, it's not the same as interacting on a monitor. XR is really fundamentally different in the way you interact with it. So yeah, this is a really interesting use case.
Yeah.
So we're just resetting the slideshow.
So I can actually switch slides because I have some other... Okay, super. I'm trying here.
Also, kids definitely make the best user testers. Even though I find they're really brutal sometimes.
If your kids and your parents can figure it out, that's usually a very good sign, right? Like,
yeah, definitely. If it's intuitive, interactive, they're very good at identifying what's fun and what's not fun, and they're very honest with their feedback. I find children.
We test a lot.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, obviously, with XR devices, generally, they're not, the recommendation is not that children are using them, but it makes sense that with this kind of game that you'd want to kind of test a physical prototype with kids.
Here's the next slide. So this is about, I think trying to say, okay, let's not put up checkered flags. Let's see if we can make something that's sort of really shows this is the goal. This is where you go with the characters. And the next one again. There it is. Super elaborate models. I guess the idea was to say, give a little bit of pile of bricks and let the user figure out how to complete the level or how to build the level yourself or something like that. I think, but it was clear after these little experiments that there was something there. Everybody knows how to build with Lego bricks. Everybody knows how to sort of what an incomplete model looks like, right? And it felt like it had an affordance that actually communicated itself very well.
I love that you can already see the progression. The first slide, it was just like the platform, and now you already got into the mechanic, which is later introduced in the game, which is you have more pieces to play with. That's so cool. It happened naturally. Yeah.
For any listeners who aren't familiar with that term, I just want to touch on that. You mentioned affordances. So affordances, feel free to correct me if anyone has a different definition. But for me, affordances are sort of visual indicators of an object that demonstrate what you can do with that object. So a classic example is a good affordance on a door would be if it's a push door, that it has just a panel with no handle. And if it's a pull door, that it has a handle. And that kind of gives the indication of like what you can do with that. Now, that's not always the case in real life and design of objects, sadly. But I think this is a great example of the affordance of these bricks that you can kind of, it's quite intuitive and clear what you can do with them. So that lends itself really nicely to a spatial game.
Yeah. If I could just get the next slide, I'll just try and talk while just a second. I'm sorry, we're having some technical difficulties.
Good. By the way, excellent build here. Clearly, you know your way around.
Yeah, was this made by your daughter or was this made by you? Because it's really good.
Yeah.
Okay, I was going to say, that's really impressive. Like, you know, I've got some of the kits that are more elaborate and I'm like, always, yeah, it's very satisfying to build them out.
So now it works. Yeah, awesome.
Great.
Okay. Yeah, so this next one is trying to make a very simple digital, very crude digital prototype also in Unity. Obviously, that was super fast, importing some bricks out of the Lego Digital Designer and seeing if that also worked in digital. And I really think we got the same kind of signal there when players tried it, just tapping a brick, picking it up, placing it where they think it should be. And then obviously it's a very simplistic model there. And then we moved on to, that's also me trying to build digital models in the Digital Designer to try and come up with some moods and some vibes for what the game could look and feel like. There's no story yet. There's no sort of synopsis. We don't really know what the game is going to be about yet because we haven't really proven anything other than the idea. So this is where we step into to prototyping. Just a second. I'll just...
That's a really nice,
These
really
are sort of the elaborate trying to make some mood building stuff like that. And then, we need to switch to I have some movies as well. Here it is. This is the very first prototype that Jonas actually built. And the whole goal with this one was to say, can we make it intuitive? I'm just going to pause it right there to say, if there's a brick and a model, can you figure out where this brick goes? Right. And I think... And so that was a fun little experiment that sort of led to us to believe that this is something that would actually work.
And so at this point, this is in Unity, right?
This is in Unity, yeah.
Nice, okay.
Yeah. And this one a little bit more difficult. You have to sort of rotate and figure out. And we had this
feeling all Gestalt puzzles. So just using psychology of what we believe the players would think would be the correct solution.
I see. Okay. And all our training as children with Lego bricks themselves, right?
Sure thing. There's a lot of affordances in those
a lot of
already.
Yeah. Exactly. So moving on to the next proof is to figure out if we could tell a story. So starting to invent the idea of a couple of characters, a young one and an older one, a parent, and to work with this navigation idea that you had to sort of place these little jump-up bricks. They're called these little one with the one knob on it. And that's that sort of movement. I can just play this as well. And so building with bricks, placing the jumpers, figuring out where would we go, always having that clear path on the screen of where the characters should be heading towards. And then a little bit of sort of a narrative, what can you say, a little bit of a narrative surprise there. So he fell into the waterfall. Yeah, it's very very dangerous. And then he's like down in the underground. Here we have some dangerous environments with some robots plowing around and stuff like that. So in a month we made a full prototype of I don't know, 10 levels or something like that, just going through the idea of making something that could be played and had a simple narrative. And it ended up in this scene where after he's been into the dangerous underground, he comes back home and he meets his parent there. And then at the very end, exactly. And I think then we just used this special break. I'm going to get back to that. And then they meet up in the end. And that was it, right?
So this prototype itself had a whole like journey just from beginning to end. Just the prototype.
Yes. And that's the first thing we did. It was the first month, I think. Just did it super quickly, put in the models, just do something fast, sort of more like a gut feel. Could we do this? What's the idea, right?
And how did it feel at the end of all of that?
It felt great, I think. I think we went very far. Just a second.
That's a really nice lesson for other developers listening, or game designers or artists or any creator really. It's like that first MVP of first of all testing the mechanic, whether that's it with a paper prototype or a physical prototype, and then kind of, is that mechanic fun? If so, great, test out the journey, test out the kind of storytelling, the look and feel, and then if that all works, then it's time to kind of launch into the full thing, rather than building the back ends straight away, building doing all the heavy lifting right away. I find really that kind of build your MVP prototype small and then iterate little and often, and it's really nice to see that in action.
And not
I think-
worrying about too many things at once, like exactly
Yeah,
what you said, Antonio. Like
There
the gameplay plus the story plus the. It's like if you're not convinced by the gameplay, you're never gonna get into the story anyway. If it's not a narrative first game, yeah.
So I think so we realized that we invented this weird idea that bricks could tell a story, and I think this is called the hugging brick. This is the brick where the characters can sit very close and almost like look like they're hugging. So we decided that this is definitely something we can do. So we started making other prototypes like vehicle movement, traversal, and riddles and doors and codes and crazy things. And we started making all of the concept art for it, and make some paint overs with our art. We have a modeling artist who's both a Lego modeler and a painter at the same time. So he did some really awesome
Nice.
sketches.
Where'd you
on
find this person?
what they
Yeah, look at this art. It's
awesome.
amazing.
Yeah.
I love the feel. Like every level has this very distinctive aesthetic and feeling.
Yes.
Like the lighting
Heavy
is
atmosphere.
very, everything from like moody and the kind of mist and opacity. Like, yeah, they're very distinctive. They're almost like not different games. Like they're visually consistent. But yeah, the mood is very different for each one. It's amazing how much you can convey with like bricks.
Yeah, exactly.
Really incredible.
Very much Stockholm inspired, where he's also from. So
I can see it.
if you're
Now,
from Stockholm, you would be able to
You'll be able to
kind of
recognize we got
see
that.
the scenery.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And I think so. I guess at this point in time, we feel like we have a good system for building with bricks. We have a good way of telling stories. We are ready to sort of enter the phase of starting to flesh out this game, right? And I think the next thing that happens is that we build an overview map, and we write a 4-act epic narrative about play and growing up and your connections to your parents and stuff like that. And so the ambition is very high, that's for sure, at this point in time. I think we start making these lush environments as well for the game, because we wanted to fill the entire screen with Lego bricks. And this is where I actually have another video showing some of Mikkel's magic here. This is our first little venture into something that resembles maybe some AR or VR, if you will. Try to play around with the gyroscope of the phone to make something that looks three-dimensional. I don't know if you have any extra thing to add, Mikkel.
I love that it's coming through just on video of
it's
the
actually,
screen. It's actually really
crazy,
coming through the 3D effect. That's incredible.
It's also in the final game. So if you're playing on the phone or iPad, you can see the same parallax effect. It was just to get a little bit of more depth into what is mostly a static 2D image in the game. So because we're always from the same camera angle, so it was to get a little bit of life into it when you have it in your hand. So
so that sort of was the beginning of the project, and I guess something that happened if you switch to we started sort of fleshing out the scope of the game, and we also started building levels, and we started testing it. And I think we realized pretty fast that there was some stuff that still didn't really work. I think especially on the controls, we had a lot of issues making it as intuitive as we wanted it to be. It was very difficult. We started out using the 3D touch with the haptic interface on the phones, and it was very hard to teach players how that worked. We had to go through a lot of iterations to get the control scheme to be really good and intuitive, and that was sort of a very
But the feeling of putting down a Lego brick with 3D touch, not a feature anymore, but just that feeling of pushing into the screen and it goes
that was really good
on your thumb.
That was
Amazing.
And did you start testing this externally very early, or were you just testing it within the team, like to get the controls right?
We actually brought in players who hadn't seen it before, and sort of steadily, weekly actually, and just gave them the device and just said, just try and play it and see if it works. And if it didn't work, we just needed to go back to the drawing board. We're very, very. It's the most tested game I ever worked on. It was just a new paradigm. I think we wanted to do. We wanted to do what everybody talks about, like test a lot, and then people do it. Myself included. You get around to it, and you're like, oh yeah, okay. I don't like the answers. But this time around, we really took the pain early. But also, I think it also had something. I mean, it also changed the scope of what we wanted to do, right? Because we wanted it to be good, really good to play this game. So this great world map was quickly sort of cut down into almost like a third of what we wanted, because we simply didn't have time within the scope of what we wanted to do to make it. And it actually, what we realized in the end, that we actually, by taking this journey onto this and trying to explore every single alleyway, we actually ended up many ways back where we started, we sort of switched back to these little dioramas because they were so much cooler, so much easier to communicate, so much more like a Lego model, and also simpler to present on the screen and simpler to make, if you will. And somehow it actually looks a little bit more like the physical prototypes. So that's
and it's great to see everything presented on the screen just in one go, the whole puzzle. So you can kind of like
exactly, and it's kind of this So in that sense, we were now set up for scope and for narrative, and we knew what we wanted to do, and we just had to do it. The next thing was just we needed to make sure that we told the story that everybody so that everybody could get what we were trying to do. And I guess the main point in Builder's Journey from a narrative perspective is the whole idea that the dad or the parent character doesn't have time to play because he needs to go to work. So we had to have him on this work plate scenario where he needed to do something very mundane and very boring, but it needs to be played. It needs to be, so we give the player the emotion of not having time to play, but to actually have to go and work. And that was also a tough nut to crack because people weren't actually ready for getting a story in a game like this. They thought it was a little discrete puzzle, so they didn't really understand that there even was a story in the game to get once they got to these narrative bits. So I think that's the reason the whole sort of campsite is there. It's because we needed to show them dioramas that weren't puzzles so they were ready to get dioramas that weren't puzzles later on. We needed to give them something where they know, okay, there's going to be little tidbits of information as well, and we needed to establish the characters. They didn't know there were characters. It was a little tougher than expected, to be honest.
It actually works really well because when I reached this diorama, I was like, what's the puzzle here? And I was really trying to figure it out. And then I was like, well, it slowed me down for a moment. And I was like, oh, okay. We're just
it makes sense. You need to kind of set that precedent of like, here are the mechanics of this game. Here's how this game is going to work. There are these kind of cutscenes. There are these like character development pieces, which, you might come in thinking, purely this is like a puzzle game without any plot, because those exist too, and those are valid too. But you can see why people's expectations might be different to what you're trying to. So it makes a lot of sense to kind of set that precedent and be like, oh no, this is like part of this. Yeah.
And there's a notion that there's only so much bandwidth you can convey information, in sort of a stream, and if you convey too much at the same time, players won't get it. So you need to show them one thing at a time until it is in there, right? And that's true for all of us. If we're busy watching a cutscene, we can't understand what's going on in the gameplay, and vice versa. We need to be ready for new information, right? So that was a very interesting. But I think that we kind of that sort of really helps us to nail the idea of a narrative. It's also a very simple narrative, but I think we got it across. We got people to understand and feel what was going on. So we just cranked away at building these awesome dioramas to make a full game, and that was just such a great experience to work with these Lego elements and really try and flesh out and detail all of these beautiful dioramas. Such a child dream come true somehow, right?
Seriously. Did you ever start with just the diorama first before getting into the puzzle, like visual first, or was it always like puzzle then like add the look to it? What was the...
I think we had this sort of concept, what we call gray brick, I guess. Maybe Jonas, you could talk to that a little bit.
I mean, all levels have gone through a gray brick version, which is the kind of only the flow of the design, with a few elements to hint at what the game mechanic it is, and then having a polished version. But definitely we've had gray brick versions that don't resemble the polished versions at all, because there were more room for the experienced Lego modeler to kind of jam on what the elements can do themselves.
That makes a lot of sense.
And so it goes back and forth. Sometimes when a model gets finished, you're like, ooh, we could do this instead. We need to go back to the game design. And we work that iteratively with what we do, because we get so much information of just moving through the process. We learn so much also from testing and stuff like that. So there's a lot of that back and forth going on, but I guess we try and separate gameplay from visuals and narrative as much as we can, because we needed to work on as a layer underneath, and then we put all the rest on top. But it can go back and forth and round, definitely.
The homestead here you have in the center left of the screen, that's a good example of mostly gameplay only taking place in the front of the diorama, and all the aesthetics are like at least half of
That's what made me ask the question, actually, seeing that particular diorama.
Yeah.
So as a little sort of minor case study in how we actually think about these things, I just have a little sort of run through of one of the problems we had to solve, and that like actually took going back and forth. So that's kind of interesting. I think the last puzzle in the first version of the game was very small. So this was the last puzzle of the game. And here we just ask the players, and I guess they've been playing, it's a very short game, right? They've been playing for like 1 hour, 1.5 hours. And here we ask them to operate this crazy brick printing device. And they need to cool. understand that at the top of the page with all the little hats up there, one is light blue, the other ones are darker. That's where you need to put the hat of the kid into the middle to get the robot to print in the middle spot. It's very abstract. It's really a stretch to get players to understand how this works.
Right.
So we figured out, I mean, it was very tough for players to understand. We needed to show them a little bit more about the hat. This is the hat, right? This thing needs to go up in the middle there. So that's, in order to do that, we needed to go back to the very beginning of the game and actually add a scene where the dad takes a hat and puts it on the head of the kid. And the reason this is there is just to show there are hats in this game. It is a thing, right? And then later
it also
on,
builds a relationship between the two characters at the
totally
same time. I love that. Yeah,
actually, it totally did. We really needed that. This is where the kid leaves the beach and he gets dressed in his trekking gear, and he gets the little dad puts a little hat on his head. So it totally served the two purposes of layering in some narrative, showing some character, and then just showing that there are hats in the game.
It's almost like kind of foreshadowing as well of like, this is a thing,
exactly.
bear this in mind for later, he has a hat on, like, remember that.
So true.
And we actually had this, I'm sorry, that's going to be spoilers, but it's only the first half of the game. We have this weird game show where you have to do sort of a matching puzzle, and it ends up really badly when the robot friend up there comes in and wreaks havoc on the whole thing. And there we have a scene where he actually loses his hat.
No.
And then he plays in the darkness with the little light brick there as well. And we have a scene here. Oh, yes, exactly. There where he finds his hat again. And now the player actually has to take that hat with his fingers and put it up on his head. And he moves on. And now when you're actually back in this puzzle, now you know there's a hat. Now it's okay. Now you're ready for it, right? So that's an example of us going back through the entire game to drip feed information in order to make sure that people understood exactly what they needed to understand. And through testing, like weekly testing, we could just say we were just inching ourselves closer to having that feeling of getting players through the full journey, right? And
I definitely remember this journey of like finding out how to introduce the hat, but I really don't remember why we needed to put a hat there. But
No. That's exactly.
We had to have that.
We just had to have it.
We
It was
had
just
to go back through the game to actually
making
make players
problems for
understand
ourselves.
this.
For some reason, it just needed to be hat operated. That robot. I don't remember why either, but it was fun.
No.
Yeah, and this
It just is. Accept it.
Yeah, it just is.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is the actual a rare shot of the ending of the game in its initial form when we shipped it on Apple Arcade the first time. So this is a little sort of, they come back to the work site of where the dad is, and there are little micro dioramas of the game sitting in the middle. So it's even smaller version of the game that you could actually play. You could actually complete these little levels. So there was like a metaphor for the kid coming back and telling about his experiences that he had when he was off on his little journey there.
That's so meta as well.
Yeah,
like
really,
they're now playing with bricks themselves.
Exactly.
They are
Inside,
bricks.
and they're playing,
So cool.
totally crazy. Yeah.
I love
So
that.
I guess that's it, right? And we released this game, and we're very nervous about how people would what they would feel about it. And but it really, we got a lot of praise, and it was just so great to hear people that they actually felt this thing. They felt the story. Some even reported that they were crying a little bit and stuff like that. That was just
Success. Get people to cry.
Yeah, you know it's a good thing if it makes people cry,
but
right?
the most,
You're like,
I think,
"Got 'em."
the most. I have a few more. I have another slide. The most interesting one. Maybe did I go too far? Just a second. The most interesting is that they actually. I'm going backwards here. They actually started building models physically and
of the levels in the game. Oh, that's
wow.
so
that's
good.
obviously extremely full circle, right? For us, even the fact that it started as a digital, physical prototype was interesting.
But to go even more
That's
full
so cool.
circle,
Yeah.
what did your daughter think about the game?
She loved it. Both of my kids really loved it. That's for sure.
The first player.
Yeah. Definitely.
Players
Keep
it,
talking
right?
about it. Yeah, that's true.
That's so great.
And
That's awesome.
then obviously also with the help of Unity, right? We had the opportunity to make to support the game for other platforms. The Switch version was really good. Really fit the Switch very well. I think also that screen size of the handheld and those looks, and then obviously the ray tracing stuff was also super exciting, right? Super cool use case for ray tracing. It's like shiny Lego bricks.
It just
that
makes
really-
it look so real.
Yeah,
It's
It was so
incredible.
cool. Yeah, almost.
Yeah.
Better than real bricks. And
Yeah,
then we actually,
honestly, yes.
More high definition than real
Somehow.
life.
actually, at the very end here, we added a creative mode so people can build their own small little models, and there's a lot of
That's amazing.
cool models coming from our audience members. It's so interesting to see what they built. Very beautiful stuff.
Such different styles as well. Like really
Yeah.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
And my
So-
personal favorite thing to do in the game is to just go above like water and just like drop bricks into the water. to
Oh,
see
yeah.
the little, little bounce effect that
Yeah.
you guys have. It's
That's
so
a little
good.
bit of Megal magic there. Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's really that like tactile feeling where you can just like touch anything. So you can click on objects if you like without even picking up a brick. You can just click on stuff and they'll like bounce and react. You can tell you really wanted to give it this physical feeling.
Yeah, really
Yeah.
satisfying kind of tactile animation.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
really also
Yeah.
the idea with it, right? So great that you think so.
Amazing. And
I guess that's
so
it for me and the journey.
thank you for that. Honestly, so detailed. I really appreciate it. And then we'll just prep some of Jonas's game design stuff, right? Jonas, you're gonna talk to us a little bit about the puzzle design. We teased it a little bit in that presentation from Carson, but we can dive into it a little bit more about how you actually built the puzzles with what did you call it? Gray brick. I love that because the official term is usually gray box. You're calling it
Yeah.
gray brick.
Yeah,
Very
yeah.
good.
That was actually because we started doing it in only gray bricks because
As is tradition, you know, the gray.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I wouldn't
Yeah.
want to pick colors for. So I ended up picking some colors for sure. Yeah, it wasn't gray bricks in the end. Wouldn't make
Sometimes you
sense.
actually need colors to communicate stuff, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
design,
That's
also,
how
yeah.
design works. I learned that building this game now.
Orange being a key color in this game, right?
Oh yeah.
Orange. Yeah. 191 flame yellowish orange, I believe it's called.
Is that the name? Is
exact
that the
color.
actual color?
That's the actual Lego name.
Lego name. Okay, cool.
Good to
Yeah.
know.
What was it again? 191 flame orange.
Flame yellowish orange.
Oh, sorry.
Yellowish.
Excuse me. Yellowish orange.
Yellowish.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Very
yeah,
specific.
It's actually the same color
Yeah.
as my jacket. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what I'm gonna tell people from now on.
Yeah. 191 special edition. Yeah.
All right, cool.
No,
So
yeah,
I think we
I
have
mean-
the videos ready.
Yes, you could just start showing the videos, but
Sure.
I mean, a few of the points were, of course, already hijacked. But I can just talk a little bit
Wow.
into the kind of core or like concepts of how we introduce mechanics in Builder's Journey. Is a very traditional way of doing it, where you have the introduce it safe and then ramp it up, make it a little more intense. The way we ramp it up here is because you can't. There's one level you can actually die in this game, but other than that, there's only minor disturbances. Like in this level, if you're not fast enough placing the bricks, you won't be able to reach the higher levels of the level. That's the only non-safe part of this evolution of this particular mechanic. But that's kind of introducing it safe and ramping up the difficulty a bit, and then at the end twisting it. So the twist here is that you actually build on top of the sinking mod, and that's kind of the flow through all of the game mechanics we introduce in Builder's Journey, where we introduce it in a very safe environment and then ramp it up and twist it at the end somehow. Of course, there's definitely mechanics where you could say, is that really what we're doing here? And so it's all, I mean, it's a little fluent, so it depends on what the mechanic is, and sometimes there's even two mechanics at play at the same time. Stuff
And
like
what's
that.
really
But
interesting about this particular one is this is not something you can necessarily prototype physically, right? This is something you had to kind of prototype on.
definitely
unless I'm-
not.
Yeah, okay.
No, yeah. If we were to prototype all the mechanics physically for this game, we wouldn't have been done by now, I think.
Yeah. Build some mechanism that goes down every time.
Yeah, would be fun
Exactly.
for sure.
Yeah.
But all of the mod, all of them are this particular long 1x1 brick. Let me just go back a slide. One by one long brick, all stacked up against each other, and they're long because they have to not reveal their underside when they go down and stuff. It would be messy to build on your own.
That's true.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah,
See,
this is
a
what
great way
was
to visualize.
talked about a little bit earlier. This is the gray brick version of the first mod level. You can see the flow is the same coming from the bottom left going up to the dad at the top.
Yeah.
And in the polished version, as you saw in the game, it's the same flow, but with a lot of other stuff added and some flair and all sorts of things. And this is just, I mean, this is an example of you can really see the flow in the gray brick version and in the polished one. But there's, of course, a lot of times where the polished version looks nothing like the simple version because we iterated on the polished version on the way. And that was like a few of the best levels in the game is, of course, me going back and forth with an experienced Lego designer on like really because I have an understanding of how Lego bricks work, of course, but he has a much deeper understanding of it. I can only deliver the design part of it, and he can then say, "Oh, this brick actually would really suit this kind of interaction that I had in mind."
They have like an encyclopedic knowledge of like all the different types of.
I was gonna say
bricks.
like a Lego brick expert. Like that's really
Yeah.
interesting.
For sure.
So cool.
For sure.
Perfect team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a
w-
role
with-
that you can prepare from since childhood, right?
Yeah, that's
I know some
very
people that
true.
love that role.
Definitely, you can see the through line. For this gray brick process, is this done also in Unity, or did you bring it from another program into Unity?
The software you see here is like a proprietary Lego software that we use to build the models and then import it into Unity, setting up all the logic, like the 1x1 mod bricks there. Those all have logic attached directly to them, but the model itself is built in the Lego software.
Got it.
Yeah, I can maybe say a little bit about that. So everything is set up in Lego Digital Designer, as it's called, but we can sort of attach behaviors to the bricks and re-import it continuously, so we can do all the design in the Lego tool, but keep the scene in Unity updated without losing anything. So it's quite flexible, even if it is just bricks.
I remember an early version of the importer where we didn't have unique IDs for bricks. Where
I remember
like,
that
every
too.
time we
It was horrible.
re-imported, all the logic would be gone. Had to set it up again.
That's not good for iteration.
No.
I see. Yeah, makes sense.
It's
Was
really
that all?
interesting to learn.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Antonia.
It's really interesting to learn about the techniques and the kind of iteration and workflow, but also about the tools that you use, because I think that's something that's quite rare to get an insight into sort of how does a studio, you know, like for this game in particular, it's like quite specific tools for this specific use case. So yeah, just really, really interesting to kind of see the befores and afters, to see the grey brick, or like greyish, I suppose, greyish brick prototype, and how that translates, you know, really nicely.
I wouldn't show
into-
the greyest versions. That would be...
You coward.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Keep
let's
that
see
to myself.
your own like custom asset import pipeline that's very unique to this game, but still you could imagine something similar using different softwares, creating that ID and making sure it updates with the logic. So that's really cool to see. Another challenge besides the game design that you had to face was porting this game to so many different platforms, right? And when you do that, of course, every platform has different specs, different requirements, but you still want to maintain a visual identity for the game, right? On one platform, you have literal ray tracing, which obviously can't be ported to all platforms. And then you go to mobile phones, and then the Nintendo Switch, and now Apple Vision Pro. So how are you maintaining this visual identity? And is this something you foresaw when you first built the game, that, hey, this might need to be ported to multiple platforms, so we need to build it in a way, or do the art direction in a way that it can be translated to different platforms?
I think we were lucky that we started on the lowest end platforms. So we started on iPhone and Apple TV, which was that like set the bar for what we can do basically, because that doesn't both in terms of interaction, but also in terms of what it can actually pull off rendering. So we started from the low end, and then we moved up, and now we're at the Apple Vision Pro, which is a different kind of thing, but. We've been through a lot of different rendering iterations, and we started out using built-in pipeline. Then we went to lightweight render pipeline before it was universal render pipeline, and we did a custom version of lightweight render pipeline for the iOS and Apple TV and Mac versions that launched first as part of Apple Arcade, and that's also what's used on Switch and also on PC and. Yeah, both on Steam and Epic, and in case you have a low-end PC, you can still play the game. Then, for the big PC launch, we did the HDRP version with ray tracing. We did a collaboration with NVIDIA, which was really, really cool, and with the HDRP team from Unity. And that was a fantastic improvement to the visual quality. We did the same thing for the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5 and Xbox One and Xbox Series versions. So yeah, I can just skip through them. Whoops, if I go over here. So yeah, lightweight render pipeline, that's 6 platforms if you count it. And then for HDRP, that's also 6-ish platforms.
Okay.
If you count ray tracing, it's 9 platforms. So we're up to 12 different versions of the game that are actually in the same project in Unity, so we can update everything at the same time.
It's so cool that you can do that.
And now finally we're at a different version with the URP, which is Universal Render Pipeline for Apple Vision Pro. So the Vision Pro version is version 13 of the game that we're doing. And so far it's the only one that lives outside the main project, because there's like some big changes because of input is different and stuff like that. But we have 12 live versions in the same project, and then one that's different. So that's pretty cool to be able to do the whole thing from the same code base.
And is it ever a challenge to have to like update all the versions whenever you make an update to the game or a patch or anything along those lines? I
think there's a lot of QA headaches involved, and so we try to do larger updates when we need to do an update. Yeah, there's a lot of testing to do when you have that many different versions, but sort of the core game logic is the same across all versions. So thankfully, from a game design perspective, it's not different or unique versions for the different platforms.
Yeah, the game design is essentially the same across all the. I guess maybe a bit different on the Apple Vision Pro in terms of the.
Yeah, we can get to that, but the game design is basically the same. But there are like a lot of different internal changes to make it operate correctly on the platform.
Got it.
So the Apple Vision Pro is the first sort of mixed reality platform that it's on. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
That is
correct.
It
makes sense. I mean, with any, like, as someone who definitely, I work mostly in the kind of VR and AR XR spatial computing space, whatever you want to call it. It is very different, right? Like any game, like UI, UX, interactions, and then it's specific to the platform. So Apple Vision Pro, of course, you've got spatial tap gestures. You can look with your eyes and then tap with your hand down by your side and things like that. And you can, so it is very, very different to, I'm not surprised that has to be sort of a separate project. But it's super cool that the others are just one project, right? Like Unity always says,
Yeah.
you can kind of create once, deploy anywhere, and this is a really
that's right.
nice example. Like 12 different platforms, basically in
times.
one project. Like that's wild. So.
We do have a few handles inside Unity that does something that you're not allowed to do, like switch render pipelines and change materials behind the scenes and stuff like that. But it's all from the same code base, so it works really well.
Yeah,
So that's
definitely.
awesome. But yeah, I guess it's time to talk a little bit about the Vision Pro version.
Yeah.
So I think we have some videos. I just need to get a remote running
Cool.
so that I can swap through them.
Excited to see this.
So if we can start with the first.
Antonia, it's just gonna take a little second to prepare that video. I'm curious, Antonia, you've had some time to mess around with the Vision Pro already?
I have, yeah. So
Apple.
as you might be able to tell from my voice, I'm English. I'm based in the UK. The Apple Vision Pro is not released in the UK yet, but I do have one that I went to San Francisco to get. And yeah, I've had some time to noodle around with it. I've joined Zoom as my persona and sort of freaked out my colleagues. And played a couple of games. I did have to create a new Apple ID, so a USA-based one, because with a UK-based one, you are locked out of the App Store. Hopefully I don't get in trouble saying this on stream. But now I have a USA-based Apple
Won't tell
ID.
anyone.
Hopefully that's fine. And yeah, no, it's been really interesting. Like I've used a lot of different headsets over the years, and I'd say that the Apple Vision Pro is very comfortable to use in the sense of like, if I'm interacting with windowed content or volume content, I can just have my hand down by my side and use my eyes. So typing on a keyboard, I find like a virtual keyboard floating in the air, I find much less tiring. Whereas often in VR or AR or XR, there's a kind of floating keyboard that you have to reach out and press with your fingers. And that gives you, there's a term of gorilla arm, where your arm is like really tired and massive because you're always doing this. And I really experienced that quite a lot. So it's great to be able to just kind of have my arm resting in my lap or by my side and just look and then tap, which is lovely. I haven't had a chance yet to experience. So there's kind of, I guess, 4 types of content, I'd say, on Apple Vision Pro. There's windowed content, so it's in a 2D window with no parallax or stereoscopy. There's content which exists in volumes, so it's sort of a bounded mixed reality content. You can have different windows and different volumes next to each other. So you could be playing with a mixed reality game in a volume and then watching a movie in another window. So it's kind of like having lots of windows open on your computer, except there's a spatial element. Then there's kind of unbounded, fully immersive, well, it's not called fully immersive, unbounded immersive content. So basically XR content as we typically think of it. So that takes over your whole environment. You can still see, you're using the pass-through cameras, you can still see your real environment, but you've got digital content like all around the room or anywhere you want it. And then there's basically virtual reality, so fully immersive content where you can't see your environment anymore at all, with the exception of your hands. So sometimes you can see your hands. It depends on the application and what you're developing. Unity is exposing that as a checkbox for devs who are creating fully immersive content. So I think that's the official terms, is windowed, immersive, and fully immersive. And then immersive can be in volumes or in the immersive space. I find that a little confusing. So I just kind of say, windowed, bounded XR, unbounded XR, and VR, essentially. But just, semantics. Yeah, so I've had more a chance to mess around with windowed and bounded content at the moment. I've been using a lot of like volumes and making mixed reality demos. Haven't had so much of a foray yet into kind of fully immersive, essentially VR content. But that's the simplest way to port VR games over. And so I know there are a few games that have been kind of ported over from other headsets and things like that. So I'm excited to have more of a play.
Thank you for that. That's actually really great context going into what Mikkel's about to talk about. So I really appreciate that.
I hope it didn't hijack
absolutely.
anything.
No, that was perfect. I mean, I haven't used the Apple Vision Pro, so for me, that's an amazing context for the conversation. Thank you. So, Mikkel, yeah, I think it's ready for you. Please take it away.
Yeah, so I think that was a great introduction by Antonia to the different modes of the Vision Pro. So this is a very short trailer for what it looks like on the Vision Pro, and it is in bounded mode, which is like mixed reality and inside a volume, which is like a cube that's invisible in space. So it can sit alongside other apps and you can move it around freely and place it where you want to. So that's the mode that we ended up selecting for Builder's Journey. Oh, hang on. Oh, it
The same
audibly,
plant
yeah.
as is in the background of you.
It's recorded in the studio, so that's why, you know. And we moved the
I wouldn't
plant
have
around.
noticed.
We moved the plant around,
amazing.
so
Yeah.
it's pretty good. So maybe as you can see in the corner, sometimes a hand is popping out. So the way you play it is that you look at the brick that you want to interact with, and you pick it up by doing the pinch gesture, and then it tracks 100% with your motion. And you release to put it down. You can either rotate the brick by doing a rotate gesture with one hand, or do a tap with the other hand while holding it. And it doesn't matter which hand you use to pick up the bricks. It's just like whichever is pinched first is used. So all the levels in the Vision Pro version are the same as in the other versions that Carsten and Jonas showed some images from. But and it's sort of like the base what's it called, like the base view angle where you place it is sort of the same, so sort of tilted a little bit and seen a little bit from above if you place it. Obviously you can like put it up in the air if you want to, but it's meant to be played on a table in front of you, so you have more or less the same viewing angle as you do in the screen-based versions. And yeah, so the interaction is mostly the same, and the levels are 99% the same. We had to build the backsides on some of the levels because normally you don't get to see them, but here you can actually get up and walk around and see the backside.
I wouldn't have thought of that. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
But it's not a normal use case. So if you're playing the game, you mostly sit in one place and play it, right? But you can sort of get up and get around, and so we had to do a little bit of patching on the backs. So here's one of the mud levels that Jonas was talking about. There's a little bit of mud going on. And the start of the game is in this sort of very mixed reality mode where you get to see your full environment except for the Lego model. But as we move further into the game, this sort of mood of the game changes a little bit. So it becomes enveloped in a sort of skybox to do a little bit of the same mood setting as we do in the other versions. So there's a little bit of that in the next level, I think, that shows up.
I love that there's this range of sort of immersion almost of like, you know, mostly your real environment and then, you know, no effect on lighting, things like that. And then as you move forward through the game, there's kind of more, you know, it's a great example. Yeah. So
it's only possible to record 1 minute at a time on the Vision Pro. So that's why there's some sort of overlap sometime between the video clips. But this is the campsite scene that Carsten also showed a little bit from. So that's where you enter the more immersive state, and it's still in this bounded volume so you can still have your browser open next to it, and you can still have a video running next to it. But when you turn on the light, it sort of envelopes around you. So you still have your real environment around you, but it's sort of more moody.
Wow. Okay. That's awesome.
And yeah. So that's a later level in the same setting. So here we move a little bit away so you can see that it's sort of a ghost skybox that's around stuff.
I think this is a really, really great example for other developers. I've had a lot of questions from people about, you know, with the Vision Pro, if I am developing this kind of bounded content that's in a volume, can I have a skybox? What does that look like? Because obviously it won't be all around the user. It'll be just around my application. I don't want to force the user to shut other windows necessarily. You know, that's not the intention. But how can I kind of still use that as a feature, still have that kind of lighting and mood? So yeah, this is a really great example. Like I'll be showing this to a lot of people who ask me that question.
Yeah, so yeah, I think it works quite well. It's like there's obviously still things that we could do to improve it, but you can sort of get the sense of the size of the volume by the size of the skybox around it, right? So anything that's outside the skybox will not be rendered. Basically, it's clipped away, so you can't see it.
Perfect example there with the character leaving the leaving the
character
volume.
Out.
Yeah.
And we can take a look in the simulator in a little bit, but
so I just want jump in and mention something about that. So for anyone who's wondering how you set the kind of size of the volume, So Unity has something called a volume camera that we've created, which is part of our polyspatial package for Apple Vision Pro. And that's how you kind of determine where the volume is. The volume determines the origin of the content inside it. And that has two things called dimensions and output dimensions. So the volume camera's dimensions, basically it's dimensions in Unity. You guys know this is kind of more for the benefit of listeners who are wondering.
We can also take a look in the project in a little bit, but it's
Oh,
fine.
amazing. Oh, maybe you're going to explain this then.
No,
Maybe
no,
I don't need to. But
just go ahead.
The context is great, Antonio.
So
Thank you.
yeah, just from the dev kind of point of view, right? So
Yeah.
the volume camera has these dimensions and output dimensions. So dimensions are the dimensions in Unity. So the larger the dimensions of the volume camera in Unity, the smaller the content inside it. So the content will kind of scale down. You can think of it almost like the resolution of a television. You'll be able to fit more content inside that volume. And then the volume camera has output dimensions, and that's how large it will appear in the real world, in the physical space for the user. So if you had a very, very large output dimension, you'd have a very big volume, and all the content would be, respectively bigger as well. Big dimensions are the opposite. The content would inversely scale with dimension. So hopefully that's clear, and that gives
It's such a
context.
new way to think about things. It's so interesting.
Yeah,
I like
right.
it,
It's
yeah.
a whole new paradigm. So I
Yes,
think because
exactly.
typically we haven't really had XR content that exists in volumes. Apple has these concepts of shared space versus immersive space. So shared space is where you can have windowed content and content in volumes interacting not interacting with each other, but you're using them side by side. You can have a movie, you can have a browser, you can have this, you can have Lego Builder's Journey, for example. And then the immersive space is where it's almost like full screening an application. So it takes over the device. So VR content, for example, would always be fully immersive. You can't do something else at the same time, fairly obviously. And then some XR content would also be fully immersive. So these are kind of like quite new concepts, I'd say, for the mixed reality space. It's not typical that you'd be able to run many applications at once. That's quite a new paradigm. So the volume camera is kind of invented to work with that new paradigm. So yeah, it's a new way of thinking about things, but it's fairly intuitive having used it.
Yes,
So
it is.
interesting.
But it is very different. So if we skip back to the screen share, I think we can show a little bit more. I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about the differences between Vision Pro and other platforms that we've been working on so far. So I was just starting with what Antonio already mentioned, which was
I did hijack. Sorry.
No, but it's
No,
fine.
no,
It's
no, no.
fine. It was a good introduction. So bounded mode, which is what we're using, which is like a box. It's similar to a windowed mode on a desktop PC. And unbounded is full screen on a PC. Fully immersive is a regular VR experience. There's no pass through in the headset, so you can't see a real environment unless you sort of step outside of some bounds, and then you can see a real environment. So so we chose bounded mode, which is the most constrained mode, I'd say, both in terms of what you have access to and how stuff is being presented on the screen. I'm just going to go over the different parts that are different. So interaction in bounded mode, it's very, very limited what you can actually do. And I can just show in Unity maybe I can. Yeah, there you go. So that's actually that's how you set it up in Unity. You have a cube that says this is where the game is, and anything inside this cube is being rendered. Anything outside is not being rendered.
So cool.
So just to clarify there, if an object is like half in, it will be half clipped. You'll see kind of half the object, and then the other half will not be rendered. It will not have any kind of impact on the game. It basically won't exist. So the volume camera, as well as showing you the dimensions of the thing that you're kind of rendering, it'll show you the bounds of the, of the content. So you know whether it's going to be included or not included, basically.
So can it defy the existing mesh to cull like half of a mesh? Like you have to.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's like a clipping plane. So it's like an object moving closer to the camera in a regular game, right? It's just being cut off, and you don't see the left side of it if it's moving.
That's great.
If it's moving out of screen or out of the bounds. So the interaction model is that you look at stuff to select it, and you don't, in bounded mode, you don't have access to the head position or where the user is looking or any sort of scene tracking data, so you can't get the mesh data of what room you're in and stuff like that, which you can in some of the other modes. And everything in that you interact with has to have a collider, so you need to make sure that colliders are set up for interaction. You can't do anything without having a collider. Basically, you only get a touch event if you're looking at something that has a collider and do the pinch motion at the same time. So if you're not touching anything, you don't have any input of any kind. You don't know where the user is. You don't know anything. We don't even know where the user is looking. So the highlight is handled by the system. So to highlight a brick, you need to add a specific component to that brick inside Unity so that it can tell the system that this is something that could potentially be interacted with, and then the system will highlight it. So in the videos you saw that there was like a faint whitening of the object that was going to be picked up, and that's handled by the system. But once you do the pinch motion or pinch gesture, then you start getting data, but it's very limited data. You basically get the position of the hand, and you can get sort of a rotation of the hand. And then there's a virtual cursor, which you also know where it's moving around. So in that sense, it's very similar to touchscreen input. You don't know anything unless people are touching the screen, right? So you don't know, it's the same kind of paradigm, right? You don't know which button they're looking at until you know that they're pushing that button. Then you know stuff is happening, and then you can sort of get interaction. So it's the same kind of limitations as a touch screen. That's basically it. So you just you know where the player's looking right before they do the pinch motion, so you can know what they looked at and exactly where they looked from, but you can't, I don't know if there's any use for that data. We don't use it for anything, at least. So let me just switch to simulator actually, so you can see it. So the simulator is a Apple part of Xcode. It's where you can sort of preview what the game will look like on the Vision Pro if you don't have a headset.
Nice.
So I can say if you don't have a headset, it's going to be hard developing stuff, but the simulator is a good starting point, so you can sort of simulate the most basic stuff. So in this case, my cursor is acting as my eyes. So if I look at this one, you can see it gets a faint highlight. I can maybe move a little bit closer. So you can see it gets a faint highlight, and then once I click, then you can get the motion of whatever you're doing. And obviously in the simulator, it's like a simulated 2D motion, so it's a little bit tricky to put the bricks down where you want them. But on the device, it's a full 3D motion, so you can move the brick around as you want to. So it's actually really, really hard to test the game in the simulator. We can see if it looks sort of right, but it's very tricky to play the puzzles in the simulator.
It's interesting you bring that up, because I was using some demos in the simulator, and it's true that I think for something that has a lot of forward and backward motion that is key to the game, that's kind of tricky to test in the simulator. Really, really good for testing things like visual look and feel, shaders, do they work? Left, right, and up, down interaction. But because necessarily you're testing it on a monitor, there's not really a way to simulate forward, backward. So that's a little tricky. So yeah, it's funny that you bring that up. I found that too.
And you can only do, so it's basically one touch that you can do, and then it sort of like does this, and then you can hold down shift to move in and out. But you can't do the rotation gesture, and you can't do a second gesture. So it's hard to test like rotating the bricks and stuff like that. It's impossible to do in the simulator. But let's get back to here. So that's basically what you can get from the interaction on the Vision Pro. And it's once you sort of get to the mind state that it's like a touch screen with a depth, then it makes sense. But in the beginning, it's really, really tricky, because you want to do all sorts of fancy stuff. You want to do raycast from the eyes, and you want to do, want to know where the head is, and you want to know all sorts of things. But if you sort of get into the mode of the system is designed to work in a specific way, then it sort of makes sense. And then you need to design around that to get good interaction patterns going. And I think because we were touchscreen first, it wasn't that big of a leap. We obviously had to do some things, but it wasn't like a massive change in what we needed to do. And we've always been like, you can play the game with one finger on your phone, right? So we don't need a million different inputs. So just having your hands is really natural and very, very intuitive.
So I do want to clarify for any Unity developers listening that you can do different interactions in the immersive. So I was talking a bit about the shared space versus the immersive space. Again, you guys know this is kind of more for the listeners. So anything in the shared space, so that's windowed or kind of volume bounded content, that this is all correct. You don't have access to like ARKit data, so head, hand, scene data, plane detection, head pose, things like that. You do have access to that when you're in the immersive modes. So if you have an unbounded mixed reality application, or you have essentially a VR application, then you have access to ARKit data, and that's much more like developing for a typical XR headset. So if you're an existing VR or XR or MR developer, then unbounded XR and VR are essentially the same. So you would use an XR rig, you would have access to, you can use all the kind of familiar packages, you can use the XR interaction toolkit, you can use the XR hands package, and all that good stuff. So a lot of this I think is specific to volumes. If you're creating something that you want to run alongside other windows and other volumes, then that is much more limited in terms of the kind of interactions that you can implement, and then the data that you have access to as well.
Yes, absolutely. It is the most restricted mode and the most sort of concerned about privacy.
Yes.
Compared to the other modes. Unbounded mode, you get access to a lot more stuff like head position and stuff like that, which is obviously useful for other things as well. But we'll get to that in a bit. So rendering in bounded mode and unbounded mode, it's actually not Unity that does the rendering. It's Reality Kit, which is a Vision OS plugin thing. So that handles all the rendering to the screen on the device. If you're in fully immersive mode, so like VR mode, you can do regular rendering with Metal from Unity, so you can get your regular Unity rendering. But on the bounded mode and unbounded modes, it's very, very much different. So we had to redo a lot of stuff to get it working, obviously, because we used custom versions of both lightweight render pipeline and HDRP before. It was a completely different workflow, this, and we didn't use shader graph before, and now in order to do stuff in bounded mode, if you need custom shaders, you need to do them in shader graph, and they need to be based on universal render pipeline shaders. Behind the scenes, those are converted to Material X shaders, which are like an industry standard shader format that Apple is supporting, and you can actually look at them in some tools from Apple Reality Composer Pro. You can sort of debug what's going on if you need to get into the details of what's converted. There's a very limited feature set as it is now. Like fog, shadows, and lighting are not fully supported. Lighting is partially supported in Unity, but fog and shadows are not supported. There's no full screen effects, and in terms of the meshes that you can send over to Reality Kit, it's limited in what formats it can handle.
Besides the fog, shadows, and the lighting, when you convert the shader graph shader to Material X, is it a one-to-one? Like, do you see the shader as you saw it in Unity, or is there a bit of a difference? Or
it's different. So if you do a lit shaders, which is like Unity standard, where Unity lights are working on it. If you do that directly without doing any patch up stuff, lights won't work on the Vision Pro. You need to add extra stuff to get that working, and the lighting on the Vision Pro is all image based. So if we look at the simulator again, like all the lighting in this scene is generated from a like image-based lighting that is coming from the simulated headset in this case, but from the real headset. So if you're looking around in a scene with, or in a room, if you're in a room that has dark lighting, all the lighting in the game will also be dimmed, right? As you can see here, it doesn't look exactly the same as it does on the headset, but it sort of does a simulation of it, so you can see you get the reflections from the real world on the bricks and stuff like that. So that's really good looking in most cases, but because there are no shadows and stuff like that, you still, in most cases, you need to do some work yourself. So we
in terms of artistic direction, do you feel like you lose a bit of control, or you have to accept that, you know, the skybox is not always going to be controlled by you? How do you adapt to that, just from a design perspective?
So the way we did it was for the start of the game, we have this very much mixed reality where the model is just floating wherever you put it, right? So I can just show it here, so I can move around, and if I place it on the desk, that's where it sits, right? And it's fully like that. But then as we move further in the game, it becomes more immersive. Let's see if I can just switch to another scene. So the cool thing about the simulator is that you actually get more or less the same results as you do on the headset. So there you see. So there you get the bounding thing around it. So when we switch to that mode, we dim the lighting from the headset, and then we add our own reflections on top, and we add some additional lights. But it is a little bit tricky to get exactly the look you want, because it still takes some of the real light into account, and you have to do some hacks to make it work properly. So
this mode is a little more controlled because you're adding your own lights.
That's more controlled. I don't remember the exact mix, but it's like 50% natural lighting from the room, and then 50% which is like a cube map thing going on from Unity.
Cool.
So yeah, where was I? On my talky talk. Yeah. So in terms of optimizing stuff, because it's shader graphs being converted to another shader graph format, and Apple's format is not completely aligned with what Unity does, it's very hard to do like shader optimizations. So some things we had to do, like automatic patching of the code that's generated behind the scenes in order to get it running properly. But one thing about the mixed reality modes is that because it's Apple doing the rendering, and it's outside of Unity, even if Unity's frame rate is low, the headset is still updating at full throttle, right? So it's still 90 frames per second wherever you look, but the game might lag a little bit. So if you have a game that has scrolling, obviously it's very important that you hit 90 frames per second all the time to get smooth scrolling. But in our case, where it's more static scenes with few things moving around, and some of it is animated as stop motion-y style, you can get around with small dips, but most of the time we hit 90, except in a very, very few small cases.
A little bit on that as well. The fact that in those modes, so in both kind of mixed reality modes, Reality Kit is handling the rendering, as you said. So what that does mean is that if you don't hit the frame rates you want, certain parts of the game will slow down, so scrolling, but the rendering won't. And so what that means is you won't get that kind of visual tearing or lag that you might be used to if you're a mixed reality developer, that often causes nausea in users. So in my experience, I think you're much less likely to get nausea in experiences in this kind of mixed reality mode, because you don't have that kind of stuttering. You just have a slowdown of kind of game logic and game animations, things like that.
Exactly. And it obviously depends on how much your game takes up of the screen, right?
Yes, of course.
But in our case, it's not really noticeable if it dips a little bit, but it would be much more noticeable if the whole headset started lagging, right? So that's really a very cool feature of the headset. Let me see what else. So because we were sort of coming from a different artistic setup than what was initially supported on the Vision Pro, we had to do some workarounds to get stuff working. I know some of the stuff that we worked really hard on getting working is now available in Polyspatial. So some of the features that we had to develop ourselves alongside what they were doing are now at least partially available. But we're doing like ambient occlusion, which is sampled from a volume texture. That was not possible. So we had to do our own like conversion of a volume texture to a 2D texture and do lookups. We do soft shadows, which you might be able to see if I just jump to a different scene. Oop. It's hard to see in this one. Let's take this one. Yeah. So you can see there are shadows below all the bricks and stuff like that, which is quite important, I think, if you want to simulate something that's supposed to look real. But there are no shadows, not on the Vision Pro. There's some shadows, but not exactly the same as what we were looking for, and it only came at the very end of our development time. So we had to do our own solution for that. Let's see what else. Yeah, so the switch between fully environment lighting and then more like controlled game designed lighting was also not really something that was supported. We have fog at the bottom. Once you're in the sort of immersive state, the scenes are foggy at the bottom, which is also not possible to do. And then for we have like light effects, we have light cones and stuff like that, which on the other platforms, either they were on HDRP, they were like rendered as fully volumetric stuff, and on lightweight render pipeline, they're just like billboards that were faded. And because obviously you can move the whole way around the scene. Let me just show it in, maybe I'll show it in simulator instead. Because you can move all the way around the scene, it's not really working very well in let me find a good one, this one. It's not working very well to have a flat thing. So what we have, you see the light cone here. So we're doing that as basically a mesh, which just has like an edge fall off.
Right.
Nice.
So the thing is that in shaders you can know where the head is, but in C# or Swift or whatever code your game is running on, obviously in Unity it's C#, you don't know anything. But from a shader you can know where the head is looking, so you can do sort of edge fade effects and stuff like that work.
Yeah.
So we had to update those as well, but that was not the biggest issue. Let's see. I think that was more or less what we had to do with the rendering stuff. Obviously, converting all the shaders and getting our lighting system to work with that stuff, it was a bit of a challenge, but it was definitely within the realms of the possible.
I just want to mention it's correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's typical to have all of these challenges and some like half-baked features, especially when you're a launch title on a new
Definitely.
kind of like product, right?
Yes.
Yeah. But then being able to see these workarounds and these examples help other developers and help the developers of these platforms kind of build the correct solutions for development, to have a real use case like this. So you're really pioneers, kind of in a way.
Yes.
Yeah, it's really valuable seeing these workarounds and things like that. Like I think the support, may or may not change in future for these different features. It's really interesting from my perspective to see, how many of these challenges were because you've gone from a non-spatial computing, non-XR kind of platform, like this being the first one, into a kind of spatial computing platform, and then how many are specific to the Vision Pro, like things around rendering and shaders, and a lot of that is kind of based around the fact that Reality Kit is handling the rendering. So for like a virtual reality experience, that developer might not find exactly the same things. Like that's rendered, as you pointed out, VR is rendered with the Metal Graphics API. It's just rendered twice essentially and becomes stereoscopic. So in VR, the shaders are kind of more or less the same as they would be on something like Mac OS. So yeah, it's really interesting from my point of view to see how many of these are XR related and how many of these are related because specifically it's bounded volumes, and how many of them are specific to the platform. It's kind of a combination of all three.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I can just show a shader graph here that, and it's a little bit of a spaghetti monster, but that's the way it ends up.
Love me some
so it all ends up in a standard lit shader, URP shader, but then we do like special stuff. So we need to get the world position to sample the shadows. So that happens here. And that needs to be done in a specific way on the Vision Pro because of the bounded volume. I'm not sure exactly in unbounded mode, but I think some of the same things apply. We've only been working with bounded mode for most of this. Then we sample our own soft shadow. map. We sample our ambient occlusion volume thing here. This is just sampling the base Lego textures, which is basically just the Lego logo. Because except for so the static geometry has like scratches and stuff like that, but the dynamic bricks only have like the Lego logo on it. Then we do the polyspatial lighting node, which is what you need to do to get the, maybe I need to zoom in more, I don't know if you can see it on the stream. You need to add this one to get like Unity lighting going in the Apple Vision Pro version. So that only supports like a very limited subset of Unity features. So point lights, spotlights, and directional lights, and only like 4 of them, no shadows, and not like none of the fancy features. Then we do our custom lighting, which is blending our baked lighting, which is like for the immersive scenes. We blend that with the Unity lighting, and then finally we do a fog pass, which is a super hacky thing, and I'm not gonna get too much into, but it basically turns the material completely black and dials down smoothness and dials up metallicness and stuff like that to get the material to disappear, and then we add some emissive color, which is the fog color, and that's the same way that we actually blend in the Unity lighting and our own lighting solution. And it all ends up in as inputs to a regular lit material. We also do a scene mask for, like, when we do transitions, we fade out the model in a way. Oops, sorry. But yeah, that's going into too much detail, I think.
I think this is gold for like XR developers, no, Antonia?
Yeah, 100%. Anyone
Yeah.
who's sort of interested in building for Vision Pro and is like familiar with shader graph, this is all gold dust. Yeah. So really valuable.
I can just maybe,
especially because really fog is, full screen effects like bloom, fog, they're just not supported essentially at this moment in time. So yeah, like having examples of these kind of workarounds is really valuable, really clever.
cool. I'm just gonna quickly swap over to Xcode, which
People always ask me
appear here.
if there's a way to do it. My answer is usually there's always a way. It's not
There's always a
necessarily
way.
a way that is I can condone, but there's always a way.
A way.
Okay, so just to show what's going on behind the scenes. So this shader, which is shader graph, is actually converted to another shader graph type of thing, Material X shader, in which you can see in the Xcode project. If you know what the name of the shader is, you can find it. And if you go a little bit further, you can open this in Reality Composer Pro. But the shaders that we're doing are, when they're converted, they have a lot more nodes than they do in Unity and stuff like that. So actually opening them in Reality Composer Pro is not really feasible because the frame rate is like 1 frame per minute when looking at the shader graph in Reality Composer. So I'm not going to do that, but this is just to show that the shader is converted to another format behind the scenes.
And just to be clear for developers, is that something that you do manually? Does that happen under the hood? Like I haven't used a lot of custom shaders yet, but
that happens automatically. So they're converted and they end up in the streaming assets folder, I think, or the resources folder or something like that when you do the build.
Just to say that you can see them in it, you can find them in Xcode and open them up and look at them, but you don't have
you
to.
can you can find them, and if you need to because at least when we were starting out, there were a lot of issues with different things. So to figure out where stuff went wrong, we had to look at them and open them in Reality Composer to figure out where stuff was going on. But I think it's a lot better now. We still do some manual patching because it's hard to optimize it because some of the shader stuff is duplicated, and then it does like the same calculation twice. And in order to keep the 90 frames per second, we sort of eliminate that. But it's fairly limited what we need to do. So we're doing like rewiring.
Gotcha.
after the generator. We're not adding anything specifically.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. So let's see. What else is there? Yeah, I think that was more or less what was there about rendering. So audio, because we're in bounded mode, Spatial audio is handled by the system, so audio is played from the volume. From some point in the volume, I don't know how the exact computation is, because we don't know where the head is, so we can't do really anything about that. So we have a listener placed statically inside the volume where we want the mixing to happen. So we've placed a virtual head inside inside the volume, which is then recording the game audio from that position, and then that's actually remixed by the Vision OS, so that it sounds like it's, if the volume's over here, it sounds like the volume is, that the audio is coming from over here. But you can't really get full 3D audio in bounded mode, at least. I think you can in the other modes, but in bounded mode, it's like you can do 3D audio, which is then reinterpreted as a different kind of 3D audio. So that's a limitation. We're not using Unity's audio system, but it's the same effect in Unity's audio system. UI, fun topic.
Everyone's favorite topic.
Everyone's favorite topic. So thankfully, we don't have a lot of UI in the game. But when we started out doing the conversion, the Unity's UGUI, as I think this is the official name of it, it was not supported at all, basically. And I think now it's still not everything that's supported. For the other platforms, we had like screen space UI with a lot of different effects going on top of it. So that didn't really, even if it was fully supported, it wouldn't work out. We had to redo the UI. But because there were issues with getting input working and stuff like that with UGUI, we did our own very simplistic UI, which is sort of inspired by what the Vision OS UI is looking like. So it's like very simple stuff. Let me see if I can turn off something so you can sort of see what it looks like. I don't think it's critical for this game to have fancy UI, but it's basically just game objects with a mesh and then a collider so that you can interact with it. And then we have some text mesh pro on top, and then another mesh, which is just an icon. So it's like it's structured as Unity's UI, but it's remade to get it working in time for our deadline.
Nice.
Just game objects. It's just game objects. And one thing is that the sort of highlight effect from the system won't work with transparent stuff. So the meshes are actually procedurally generated to be round, so that when the system does the UI, the highlight of the UI, then the highlight is following the shape of the button instead of having a rectangle around, which you would get if you did a like a sprite button or a textured button in UGUI, right?
Yeah, so because the highlight is not customizable at the moment, and it's based on colliders. Exactly that. If you've got a kind of square sprite, and the highlight will be square. So this is a good workaround. Good to know.
Yeah. So I think that's it's the only way to do sort of a shaped highlight is to do the mesh in the shape that you want the highlight to be.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So that's it. Very simple UI we have. So it's not super big job to change that.
I love the approach.
And for anyone who has the device or has used a simulator, you'll recognize, like as you said, that's quite inspired by like the Vision Pro's UI.
Yes.
So I like the consistency there. Kind of you're using it alongside other applications, and then the in-game UI is quite similar. Yeah, you can see underneath there the dot on the left.
This is the in-game stuff. Oh, sorry, that was the wrong button. And this is sort of the system UI. Looks like this, right?
Fits right in.
So it's sort of done to look like that and be as little intrusive as possible.
Yeah, really nice.
Let's see, what was the next thing? There you go, UI. Performance. So that's a fun topic because it is not only Unity doing stuff, it's also the system, and the system is responsible for rendering the stuff, and Unity has to talk back and forth with the system, and it goes like So it's like a lot of data is perhaps being processed twice instead of once, and the reality kit side of things is structured very differently. So you need to do things in different ways to get good performance. So in our case, before every not every brick, but every interactable brick or every animated brick or anything like that in the scenes were 3 game objects. So there was like this is the brick, and then there was a renderer thing and some collider stuff and some other stuff underneath. And that was really causing a lot of performance headaches, because in Polyspatial, all the Unity game objects are at least partially mirrored on the Reality Kit side. So every transform is also on Reality Kit, and every time you move stuff, you need to update it there, and that can cause some performance issues. Or because of the interaction, that's so that like if you have too many game objects, see if you can sort of minimize them, is what our approach was. So everything is now max of 2 game objects, and we try to sort of get rid of everything that we could get rid of. You can also set masks for what you need to track on the Polyspatial side or the Reality Kit side. In case that's confusing, Polyspatial is the Unity plugin that talks to Apple Vision Pro and talks to Reality Kit, and Reality Kit is what handles the stuff on the Vision Pro side.
Yeah, I was wondering whether I should jump in and explain there.
Yeah.
So if you build for the mixed reality, like a mixed reality application, whether it's bounded or unbounded. So this is not true if you create a windowed application. A windowed application is sort of a compatibility pathway, very simple way of porting existing 2D or 3D content into basically a giant floating monitor in space. If you do that, there's no stereoscopy or 3D element, but the rendering is handled by the Metal Graphics API. So that will work just like any kind of Mac OS or iOS application. In VR, again, that's a kind of stereoscopic, fully immersive. But for the space in between, where the rendering is handled by Reality Kit, Polyspatial is a Unity technology that will take all of the kind of relevant information from your Unity application and pass that to Reality Kit so that it can render. So it will say, please create this mesh with this texture. This is the texture I want. So assign that to this material in Reality Kit, and then Reality Kit will take that information and go do the rendering. And then it will pass back anything like event information or any other information that Unity needs to hook into to run the application. So the game logic is still run by Unity, the rendering is handled by Reality Kit, and Polyspatial essentially will translate kind of information between the two.
Exactly. And because everything is sort of sent back and forth, some of the good stuff in Polyspatial is that you can turn off stuff that you don't need. So you can disable things. We don't need any UI stuff because we're doing our own UI stuff, so we can turn that off. So that's not mirrored on the Reality Kit side, and we can set up which layers in Unity that we want to be mirrored and which ones we don't want to be mirrored. So especially for collision geometry, that's really important to get the interactions working correctly. You only want to mirror stuff on the Reality Kit side that you actually want to interact with. Otherwise, you will end up in situations where you can't touch or get what you need because there's a huge collider of something, a trigger or something you use to turn on some gameplay feature can block the interaction. Yeah, and maybe if I switch to simulator, you can sort of see, you can turn on the hang on, I can turn on the colliders that are mirrored on the on the Reality Kit side. So you can see the white boxes are colliders that you can interact with. If I can pick up stuff, I don't know if I can. I can't pick that one up. It's hard to see because I don't have the highlights, but you can see.
You played the game, Mikkel.
It's
first time.
The brick he's standing on.
It's true. It's a rookie mistake. I'm sorry. Sorry, Jonas. So you can see all the UI, even if it's disabled, the colliders are still there, but they're not actually active. But that's the way Polyspatial does it. And in order to intercept interactions in the background, we have like background colliders that can that can pick up the interaction. In case you want to touch the water, for instance, we need to be able to do that because it doesn't have its own collider. Yep. I'll just turn that off again and go back to my list of interesting topics.
Yeah.
Yeah, so another thing is to disable the polyspatial features that you don't use. One thing we found was that in some of our scenes, we have like bricks that light up. And that's a material that's being instantiated. And we weren't that good at cleaning up after ourselves. So after doing that for some time, we had thousands of materials that were not being rendered, but because they were live in the reality kit side, then they caused a performance issue, because every time you set a shader global, it will have a performance impact for every material that's loaded in the game. And that caused really a lot of headaches for us, because when we started out, we weren't able to unload assets without crashing the game. So we had to do manual cleanup, and apparently we weren't that good at sweeping after our own mess as we were supposed to be. So that was one of the biggest performance bottlenecks for us, was that we were leaking materials, and that basically caused the frame rate to drop like continuously, especially on some scenes. After you played that for like a few minutes, then the frame rate was down to 15 frames per second, which was far from acceptable. But we found out what the issue was, and that is that if you have a material instance, even if it's not being rendered and it's not being shown on the screen at any point in time, if you have a light in the scene, or if you have another thing that needs to access a shader global, it needs to be passed to reality kit all the time, and that really caused a lot of performance issues for us. Thankfully, we found out that we were unloading assets at the wrong time because of this like mirroring between Unity and reality kit. Polyspatial is keeping track of stuff, and it does it in a little bit of a funky way. So if you unload stuff at the wrong time, it will go missing from the reality kit side without being missing from the Unity side. So what we found out was that if we unloaded assets after, so originally in all the other versions of the game, we unload assets after we unload a level. So we unload a level, unload assets, load the next level, which may use some of the same assets that were just used before, but because the way Polyspatial does it, it doesn't pick up on the stuff being reloaded, and then there's like a missing reference. So if we postponed that unload unused assets until after we loaded the next scene, then everything was kept intact. We have to wait a few frames to make sure that everything is up and running, but then everything's working, and it cleans out all the materials that we weren't picking up ourselves. So now performance is good. Except in cases where there's like one of those head printers going on, creating a lot of material instances. We had to do some special performance optimizations there, so that we reuse materials instead of creating new ones all the time.
Got it. When you reached that one, you were like, "Oh, why did we make this level?"
Yeah, there's a lot of.
We made that level to have the hat on the kit, but then we made the level because we had to use the hat for the kit.
Oh no! If only the hat hadn't been there in the first place.
Yeah, I think it's been placed by a time traveler or something like that.
Yeah.
Everything comes down to those hats. They're horrible. Yeah. There's also some bad code somewhere in the game, but don't tell anyone.
Again.
So that's it. This is a great learning for, I think, other developers kind of thinking about developing for this platform. That, you know, I didn't actually know this because I haven't done a huge amount with custom shaders with Polyspatial yet. So, you know, knowing where to unload assets and things like batching, I guess, instead of like instantiating new materials all the time, if you can kind of have objects just like, you know, not be non-visible but still there and revisible rather than kind of instantiating and destroying them. That sounds like that will work a little bit better. So yeah, just really valuable learning. So
yep. So in order to figure everything out and get everything up and running, we had to do a lot of builds to device. I know now there's play to device in Polyspatial, but when we started out, that wasn't a possibility, and also to get like real data on the thing, you need to test it on device. So we did builds for the device 10-20 times a day, and thankfully we have a small game, so it's not a huge issue. It's a couple of minutes for a build, so it's not something that takes days. But if you have a huge huge project that has a lot of different things that it needs to do during the build, then that might not be viable. So I think play to device is definitely a good way to iterate faster than we were able to do. So as you saw, the simulator was good for verifying that stuff is looking correctly, but it's not that great for interaction. So we had to test on device continuously. And the performance on the simulator is very different from on the device. So it's only really feasible to test the performance stuff on the device. If it's running well on simulator, it's going to run well on the device, at least from on the Macs that we're using. The simulator is significantly slower than the device is. And then like regular Unity performance testing, like using the profile and stuff, is still useful and still works. But in a lot of the things that's going on with the Apple Vision Pro, the bottleneck can be outside Unity, which you can't really pick up on the profiler. But it's still good to figure out if you're doing stuff that's not clever or it's something behind the scenes that's the bottleneck. Yeah, so I think that was more or less what I had at least made really interesting, visually impressive slides for.
Very.
Thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we're done with the thing now. If you want to ask anything, shoot.
That was amazing. Antonio, do you have any questions after?
I've learned so much, honestly.
Yeah.
Really, those workarounds are so valuable. Now, as you said, like you had some challenges that hopefully people now have some more tools for. So you mentioned play to device. I was just going to explain for anyone listening what that is. So play to device is a Unity feature. Personally, something I've always wanted for Unity as an XR developer, wearing headsets a million times a day, and having to build and then deploy and build, deploy and build, deploy over and over. So play to device is a way of basically making changes in the Unity editor and then having that reflected live in either the simulator or on the device. So hopefully that will take away some of the pain of having to build, as you said, like 10 to 20 times a day. At the end of the day, nothing quite compares to trying it, on the device and building out for real. So I would recommend doing that.
Yes.
Maybe on a daily basis at least. But, hopefully people don't have to do that 10, 20 times a day anymore because play to device exists, which is a blessing in my mind. I've always wanted that, so I'm very happy it exists. Those workarounds are fantastic in terms of things like fog and, lighting and things that aren't supported. It's really great to know that there are ways around that. Even if you describe them as hacky, they look amazing. The output is really incredible. So, and great things to bear in mind as well for devs around sort of instantiating materials and building bags to things, which I've never really thought about, but it's really true. When you're on a monitor and the kind of viewpoint of the user, things don't have to have a back. In XR, they do. So yeah, if you're new to XR development, like everything's going to be 3D in the end, even if it's not the intended use case, as you said, the user to be walking around, they still might do it. So no questions from me really, just really, really valuable advice. So thank you for that.
Yeah, honestly, it was such a pleasure to have you all on. Like, we've done so many creator spotlights, but I think this is not only the first Apple Vision Pro game we've looked at, but the first XR game in general. So this was so good. And Antonio, I'm so glad you were here and you joined on to bring your expertise and all the context as well. So that was great. And I usually like to end these streams by, of course, this was an extremely long journey from platform to platform. I'm not sure exactly how many years you've been working on this game, but I love to ask developers their final takeaways. And 5 years, thank you. 5 years, yes. Incredible. Well, that's impressive. All of that in just 5 years, honestly. I love to ask developers what their final takeaways are, some advice they have for other up-and-coming developers who are looking to get into games, maybe looking to get into XR, whatever piece of advice you have. I'll go through each and every one of you, but I'll start with Antonia, actually. For anyone who's getting into XR today, I feel like that's a completely different answer if I asked you this like 2 or 3 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Anyone who's getting into XR today, kind of a big question. Like, what kind of advice would you give to someone who just wants to just get started, get into it?
Oh, that's such a good
Not
question.
to put you on the stop.
That's such a good question. Okay. Well, I guess it depends on what angle you're coming from. So my advice would be different for someone who's new to development at all. If you're this is your first time developing anything. I actually went straight into XR development. I never was a kind of 2D, 3D game programmer before. I went straight into
Interesting.
coding XR applications,
So
which is
unique.
not kind of entirely typical.
No,
but,
not at all.
you know,
Yeah.
I came from a full dome background, so developing for planetariums and things, so quite different. I would say think about interaction and spatial interactions. So with a monitor, it's really easy to rely on mouse and keyboard input or game controller input for a console, and you can kind of reliably know that that's really what you'll be doing. You have user interfaces that are just screen space, so they're just in front of the screen. But when you move into XR, VR, or spatial computing, you can leverage the whole world around the user, or you can have things existing inside a volume. But either way, the interactions are a little bit different. So it's really worth thinking carefully about how are you going to encourage user interactions. This came up, I did a webinar yesterday with a couple of different people, including Alchemy Labs, who make Vacation Simulator and Job Simulator. And they had a really good piece of advice. Their interactions are very playful, and they're very good at what I call affordances. So having objects that visually indicate what you're supposed to do, which means that it transcends culture, it transcends language. And they recommended the book, The Design of Everyday Things, which I think is really good advice for XR developers. Don't necessarily think of interactions as game interactions or traditional UI UX. Think of it as designing objects and how would you indicate what that object is for in the real world. That's much closer to XR interaction design than typical games are. So that's my advice. Get really interested in object design.
Like back to affordance, which you were talking about in the beginning.
Yes, exactly.
Getting
Affordances
familiar
are
with
real
all
life
of that.
things, because real life
Yes.
is, XR is much more like real life than monitor based games are. So you really have to think about play and using space and interacting with objects. I find that really interesting. So yeah.
That's wonderful advice. Thanks, Antonia. And I'll now Karsten.
Yes. Hey. Yeah. I think also what we talked about here is to be iterating a lot. I think that would be my best advice. Stay in gray brick for as long as you possibly can, until you have the right experience, right? And don't be afraid to go back and circle through it until you have something that is coherent and sort of fits with itself and is sort of doing what you want it to do. So I think stepping into finalizing too soon and sort of having to sit with decisions you've made, I think it's the biggest. I think that just iterate a lot. I think that would be my advice.
Amazing. And you really showed that today. Like you
Yes.
showed that
Yeah.
process. So thank you.
Yeah.
And Mikkel.
I think for anyone starting out, I think just start small. Don't make something too big. Even this project, which is not super big, is still a large mouthful for a fairly small team to do across a lot of different platforms. So if you just play around and have fun and do simple things to begin with, and then find out what your passion is. If it's like getting things to jump in a really cool way, then go for that. Or if it's designing crazy mazes or like battle systems or whatever it is, just find out what it is that you think is fun. And then go from there. There are like so many different things you can do in games.
That's amazing.
So there's room for any kind of approach, I think.
Right. So you're saying always start with a massively multiplayer online game, and then
Exactly.
go from
Yeah.
there.
and then try to be an expert on every field. Definitely.
At the same time. No,
the
but
same
actually,
time.
that's great advice. And Jonas.
Yeah. I mean, a lot has already been said that I would mirror, but yeah, definitely try to use the third axis of motion. You actually have depth now, and that's a giant leap into a different dimension. Try not to think of games as you perceived them in the past, where it's a 2D layer on top of a 3D space, but actually try to use that dimension that you've gotten. And I will mirror Donald Norman's everyday, the design of everyday things. A great start for anyone interested in interaction design. There's also, I could name books, but that's not, I think it's more interesting for you to just start creating. Get out there.
Start playing with Lego bricks. Get started.
Start playing with Lego bricks.
Every great design starts. Guys, everyone, thank you. This was incredible. And thank you to the audience who joined us. Very engaged chat. We really appreciate you. And remember to get the game. We dropped the link to the game itself in the description, in the YouTube description, so you can check it out. There's a link to the website and a link to the Steam page there. I'm sure the website has links to all the other platform store pages. So go check that out. Again, this was such a pleasure. Thanks everyone for joining. I know it's
Thank
really
you.
late where you are right now, so go have dinner, go to sleep, have a great night.
Okay.
Thanks. We'll see you next time.
Thanks,
Ciao.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.